Many, if not most of us, have watched the movie Footloose, where the ongoing tension is between a faithful, loving father, who's also a biblical preacher, and the new boy in the high school who attends the church, but is also promoting an end-of-school dance for the students. Both are vying for the daughter's attention and loyalty. She's caught between her love and respect for her father and her boyfriend's broader view that a dance is not evil and even a religiously approved experience. Spoiler alert, in case you don't know, in the end, joy, love, and a broader view of God wins the day. I remember a similar, though less Hollywood-worthy, experience of my own. I grew up in a large, theologically and socially progressive, but still Baptist church in Texas, where my father was pastor. He was a preacher's kid as well, second generation, but with a minister father who, although highly educated in Greek and New Testament, was a professor, was religiously rigid and more like the preacher in Footloose. However, my father had grown and developed during his own years of ministry, becoming more progressive socially, theologically. His final pastorate in Austin, Texas, hippie capital of the world, probably helped complete this modulation. Our church was part of a group of several progressive churches across the state who came together to have junior and senior high camps and retreats. All the ministers of the churches committed to being active in producing, developing, programming, leading these events. One common ritual among all of them was that they often closed with an event that brought everyone together for some fun, for some music. Shockingly, often some dancing. However, we still had to be careful because we were meeting at various Christian camp facilities, and it wasn't only the Baptists who were a little nervous about dancing. So in each printed retreat program, the event was called the closing function. Because at a dance, you dance, so at a function, you function. My father, one of the ministers planning the events, learned to accept all of this. Ken Miedema, whom many of you know is a Christian and justice-oriented musician, was just starting out in the 70s. And one year, Ken was actually a guest retreat leader for one of those events. As you know, Ken was born blind, and although an incredibly gifted musician, pianist, songwriter, apparently he had never danced. And so on the final night, Ken found himself at our function, sitting by himself to the side of what had become a busy dance floor. He later relayed how he instantly reverted back to his own teenage years, becoming the lonely young man who couldn't participate, sitting on the side. But that night, one of the teenage girls came over and asked him to dance with her. First, he refused, but she insisted. So awkwardly, he let her pull him out onto the dance floor, and keeping hold of one of her hands, they started dancing, to everyone's delight. The next morning in our closing worship, Ken relayed his experiences, and as usual, had spontaneously composed a new song about it all. It began, "She asked me to dance, and I'd never tried dancing before. I had visions of everyone laughing us right off the floor. And though I protested, it just wouldn't do any good. She gently insisted, and finally I told her I would. Unforgettable. She was a fresh breath of spring on a cold winter's day. Unforgettable. She taught the singer to sing in a whole new way. Ken then flipped the words so that they all applied to God asking him to dance. I had visions of saints and angels laughing us right off the floor. And though I protested, it just wouldn't do any good. He gently insisted, and finally I told him I would. Unforgettable. God taught this singer to sing in a whole new way. Ken imbued the potentially scandalous idea of a dance with new meaning by transforming it into something spiritual, something religious, something life-giving, something holy. It was some 20 years later, after college, after marriage, after the birth of our 2 children, that I responded to the call to ministry, becoming part of what was now the 3rd generation of ministers in the Denham family. And I began attending seminary classes. There it was, much to my surprise and delight, I learned about a centuries-old understanding of the Trinitarian God as a dancing God. How had I never heard about this before? It began as early as the 4th century with the Cappadocian fathers who talked about the relationship of the Trinity as perichoresis in the Greek. Peri, the first part of this, like in perimeter, meaning circle, all the way around, whole. And choresis, which has the same root word as choreography. The verb perichoreo means to be in space, to pass or enter, to make room. And by adding one letter, it becomes perichoruo, meaning to dance around. Thus, perichoresis can be understood as a cyclical dance movement. Reciprocity, interpenetration among and between the Trinity. 3 beings distinct from each other, equal to and with each other, yet ever loving, giving, and receiving with each other. Start over. Making room with and for each other in the dance. Perichoresis, the dancing Trinity, an image of a dynamic, beloved community. What? And apparently, not only had others heard of it, they had actually been painting it for centuries. Dated from circa 1300, there's an illustrated book which has been known as the Rothschild Canticles. It's 4.5 by 3.5 inches. It's about that big. This tiny book is leather bound with rich hand illustrations, various meditations, Song of Songs, Augustine's contemplations on the Trinity. This is one of the illustrations, and it's such a fun image. There are angels playing bells and trumpets and drums at the top. There are 2 dancers bowing to each other, but pointing to the Trinity above them. And of course, the depiction of the Trinity, 3 in 1, merging, surrounding, relating, engaging with each other. In the early 1400s, the Russian painter Andrei Rublev created this famous icon of the Trinity. It depicts 3 angels visiting Abraham, but is meant to be understood as symbolic of the Trinity. 3 divine beings seated together, pointing to one another, relating to each other across the table. Here's a slightly clearer rendition. Although these are 2-dimensional, they hint at something that's dynamic, something that moves. They give an impression of a snapshot in time. So if the picture were taken just a few moments later, they'd be in different places, different expressions, different poses. I was fascinated by this rich history I had known nothing about. The ages-old, complex, confusing, often incomprehensible idea of a divine Trinity, 3 in 1, seemingly static, often portrayed as all male or 2 men and a bird. All of that morphed okay? All of that morphed into something dynamic and understandable. It's become a key theological underpinning for me of understanding who God is. God is a dance. God is dance. Not something far away, concretized, unchangeable, three-headed, like Fluffy and, Harry Potter. God began growing into something bigger. Joy, movement, mutuality of dynamic relationship. God became community, beloved community. God became Lord of the dance. Our opening song today, Lord of the Dance by Sidney Carter. Carter tells that when he composed the song in 1963, he was partly inspired by Jesus, but also partly by a statue of the Hindu god Shiva, seen in Shiva's dancing pose, the Nataraja. He said, I did not think the churches would like it at all. I thought many people would find it heretical, dubiously Christian, but people sang it, and it touched a chord. Anyway, it's the sort of Christianity I believe in. He went on to say, I see Christ as the incarnation of the piper who is calling us. He dances that shape and pattern which is at the heart of our reality. By Christ, I mean not only Jesus, because in other times and places, other planets, there may be other lords of the dance. But Jesus is the one I know of first and best. I sing of the dancing pattern in the life and words of Jesus. The holy dance is more fluid and more inclusive than we could even imagine. When I think of perichoresis now, I think of God as existing in the space between us, interwoven, flowing, between, through, around, constant movement that draws us into the dance. For Christmas last year, my husband, Phil, gave me the gift of a couples dance class at our neighborhood rec center and the promise that he would come with me. He thought it would be just for the month of January. But we kept going because, we enjoyed it and discovered another couple from First Plymouth who were taking lessons there as well. Now, Phil and I both grew up Baptist, attending dances in the 70s. So our understanding of how to dance was independent movement, rock and roll driven, with very little structure. But in our new dance class, we began learning a little bit about the waltz, the foxtrot, and even the tango. All of them much more structured than how we danced in the 70s. We had to learn about body stance and holding a frame firmly, but with flexibility, so that we had direction and space to move without stepping on each other's toes too much. We definitely focused on the music's count and which foot we led off with. Left for him, right for me. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But the second month, in February, we got confused when a new dance was introduced with a 4-beat count. Quick, quick, slow. Quick, quick, slow. Or was it slow, quick, quick? Slow, quick, quick. But we still were to lead off on the same feet. We learned how he was to initiate an invitation for me to turn. But I had to remember, was it a 3-step or a 6-step? There was a lot to remember and integrate. But there we were every Monday afternoon for several months, trying to remember and attempting to integrate the next new thing being taught. One thing that struck me was the way we had to focus on each other. We had to pay attention to how our bodies and arms were held, to the slight pressure to either maintain our direction or a lift of the arm to indicate an invitation to a turn. We were counting our steps together to stay in rhythm with each other. When either of us made a mistake, which was often, we would laugh, stop, discuss, listen to the music, and start over again. It took time to actually get better and begin to understand the subtleties of how we were communicating and what the dance and experiencing the results of our dancing together. The story is often repeated about the skills of Fred Astaire, but with the twinkle that Ginger Rogers was really better, because she had to do everything Fred did, but backwards and in high heels and usually in a dress with full of feathers. What I didn't realize, however, until I was in Ginger's position, was she also couldn't see where they were going. Now, some of you know me well enough to know that generally, I like to be in charge. That's more laughter than you're supposed to have. And I definitely want to know where we're going. But on the dance floor, I was not the one leading. Phil was. I was not unimportant in our ability to dance together well. I was critical that I knew what I was doing. But he was the one who was looking ahead to see if we would run into another couple, or if we could transition into a promenade, or if there was room to turn. My work was to look at him. I mean, really look at him. I had to look at his eyes and see where his eyes were looking, rather than my turning around and looking for myself. I had to listen to the signals he was sending and to respond to the invitation rather than take charge. I had to trust him to see what was coming. And then we'd work together to implement the dance together. It really was mutual, but each of us had different roles. What would bring delight, what was limiting, trust the solid frame, allowing us to play with steps and directions. There were definitely mistakes and miscues, plenty of oops to go around. Laugh, reset our frame, revisit what we wanted to do, listen to the music, and start over again. And we did get better. We're still not Fred and Ginger, but we had fun, exercise. We learned something new, and after 46 years of marriage, we learned a new way of relating to each other, deepening our love and commitment to each other. So when Pastor Jocelyn asked me to preach today, delving more into what it means to be beloved community here at First Plymouth, I immediately thought, yes, third generation minister, of the theology of the Trinity and this idea of a dancing perichoresis. I thought about what I had learned in our dance lessons. Perichoresis, a moving cyclical whole dance of reciprocity, creativity, trusting, listening, loving, paying attention. So I want you to play with me for a few more minutes. And let's look at some other images that might envision our dance together with this beloved community here at First Plymouth, with our future, with the divine. First is the painting behind me. This belongs to the First Plymouth Arts Collection, and I saw it, and thankfully James Bach helped put it up here and create this imagery of these three jazz musicians that are dancing and playing and enjoying. There's a liveliness to it. Second, you'll find the abstract art image, which is displayed on the screen, but it's also on the front of your bulletins. This is hard to see what the three things are, but it's also obvious they're kind of three different things. And there's sort of this fire in the middle of them, or is that the third entity, or is that the one in three? It's a different way of understanding three and three in one. Next is this image of three children. Intimate, relational, joyful. The feminist Presbyterian theologian Cynthia Holder Rich says, we serve a God who is essentially intimately relational. We serve a God who is essentially happily non-hierarchical. This image of the three. Here are some others. This modern dancer with shadows. 3 and 1. As one moves, the other shadows will change and shift, but they're connected, but they're not the same. Here's another. Flames, tongues of fire. They're 3, but they're not 3. But as it moves, it shifts, it changes. They're different ones, but it's one and the same, but it's not. How do we think of that? As perichoresis, as God, as our church. Next is this one. 3 women in the field. Joy. And this one. This blurred image. You can tell there are 3 because there's red and black and there's a kind of a white in terms of the dress or the outfit, but yet you can't see the distinction, but yet you can. Would this be an understanding of a Trinity, a beloved community of dance? The feminist Catholic theologian Catherine Lacuna says, the divine dancers experience one fluid motion of encircling, encompassing, permeating, enveloping, outstretching. There are neither leaders nor followers in the divine dance. Only an eternal movement of reciprocal giving and receiving, giving again and receiving again. The divine dance is fully personal and interpersonal, expressing the essence and unity of God. So finally, this one. They had to get in the water. You had to be a little uncomfortable, but yet they're dancing together. We are called to become part of the dance. Despite our hesitancy, we are being invited to participate. And I wonder what it would look like, feel like for us to lean into this experience, this imagery, as we continue to strengthen our beloved community. We are exploring what comes next in our future. I wonder how we can live into that process in a way that would feel like a reciprocal dance of trust and response, embedded with laughter and new beginnings. Are we willing to accept the invitation? We don't need to be worried about getting all the dance moves right or stepping on each other's toes or even getting in the waves. We can develop a dance process to envision the future. We may create a dance sequence Fred and Ginger might be proud of. Or even better, create a dance together with the Divine Trinity. Sister Katerina Pavlova writes, our dance together allows us to bring compassion to this wounded world. Dance is free and fun, and it's also loving and lively. All we have to do is accept the invitation to step out onto the dance floor. Unforgettable. And so I'm going to ask you now to actually take a few moments. And it's only going to be a couple of minutes. You're not going to get finished with the exercise. And we're not going to report back out to the group, okay? But I want you to turn to each other and respond to one or all of these questions. What's your favorite dance? When has dancing felt like beloved community? And what would First Plymouth feel like if we were all dancing together as perichoresis? So online, if you want to put them notes into the chat to share with each other that way, and here in the room, just turn to your neighbor and just talk for a couple of minutes. That's all we're going to do.